Hello, everybody. It's Tom Esch, president of Esch Consulting, with David Watts, who's EHS director for Skanska in New England. And welcome to the podcast, the Construction Culture Podcast. I'm super excited. This is only my second one, and I've known David since 2014, I believe, David. We first talked on the phone and back before Zoom was a thing. And I'm super impressed with your background. I consider you one of the leaders, one of the key leaders in the country. I know you have almost 15,000 people following you on LinkedIn, so I'm not the only one. I know you've been doing safety since the 1980s, and I appreciate your time to have a chance to talk about a construction culture, to talk about safety, and maybe a couple stories that you have. I'm so curious because you've said some things that no one else, almost nobody that I speak with uses the language of and talks about. So I'm super excited. So I guess I'd first say welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom.
And how did you get into safety so long ago?
Yeah, so I finished my career in the Navy as a photographer and had two babies in diapers and really needed to find a job. And being a photographer out in the real world is not a place where you're going to make a lot of money. So I started off as a construction laborer. My dad was a superintendent in construction. He helped me get into it. And because my dad was a superintendent, they hung a pager on me. And anytime anybody got hurt, I would be the person that would take them to the clinic. And I would always turn that paperwork into the safety director or the project safety manager. And one day I came back from the clinic and the safety trailer was all locked up. And I found out that he had quit that day. The safety manager had.
Uh-huh.
And so I asked my dad that night, I was like, what's it take to be a safety guy? And like all I ever see our safety guy doing is eating donuts and drinking coffee. So I said, I'm pretty sure I can do that. And dad said he would check into it. And a couple of weeks later, the pager went off and it was the project manager. And he kind of made me an offer I couldn't refuse to become a safety professional. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And, but, 37 years later, I think I know a little bit about safety at this point.
Wow, that's an amazing story. You came in it the honest way through the family, same way I got into construction through your dad, same as me. That's awesome to hear. Could you tell the story of the genesis of the Speak Up, Listen Up program? I know you were super instrumental in that, which I believe launched in 2007, and you were
Yeah.
involved with.
So I was working for Guy F. Atkinson Construction
Mm-hmm,
as the director of safety.
mm-hmm,
And I was relatively new with the company and we experienced a fatality.
mm-hmm,
And this is a keystone event for my career.
mm-hmm,
When this fatality occurred, it was not the first time I had dealt with fatalities, but
mm-hmm,
this was the first one with Atkinson.
mm-hmm,
And we had, as a result of the fatality, of course, there was a response. We had to go out to, this was in Southern California.
mm-hmm,
Um, and we, part of the response was interviewing all of the employees
mm-hmm,
that were involved on the day of the fatality.
mm-hmm,
And throughout the course of the interviews, there were some consistent themes where different individuals did not appear to accept their responsibility
mm-hmm,
or their accountability for, I would say, lack of action, right?
mm-hmm,
Failing to speak up,
mm-hmm,
like not saying, hey, wait a second, that's not what we planned to do.
mm-hmm,
So that's where the whole idea at the time came from,
mm-hmm.
um, to coin the phrase speak up. Like
Yeah,
you're empowered to speak up,
yeah.
specifically related to safety. And the key factor, one of the foundational root causes of this particular incident was people not speaking up.
Mm-hmm,
On this particular project, they had 2 weeks before the evolution was to occur. They had a very comprehensive planning session, and they had discussed in detail how they were going to execute the work. and specifically the methodology of installing some trench boxes. So this was a trench collapse fatality. And we had trench boxes on site. There was a plan in place to put these trench boxes in a very specific sequential order.
Mm-hmm.
We recognized in the planning session that we did not have adequate rigging to
Mm-hmm.
be able to put the trench boxes in place. And so we went out and acquired the rigging because I think in total we had 6 boxes that we needed to put in.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to have to drop the rigging. Like when the first boxes went in, we were going to have to abandon the rigging into the excavation until we could get all the boxes in place, and we would be able to recover the rigging at that time. Long story short, on the day we put in the first box, and the project superintendent put a ladder in the hole and went down into the excavation. And one of our laborers went in the excavation with him. The superintendent putting the ladder in was catalytic to the decision processes that were contrary to the plan that we had in place, and nobody spoke up. And in particular, there was an individual that was operating a piece of equipment involved in the excavation that was very vocal during the investigation phase, pointing a lot of fingers. And I had a very personal conversation with that individual that basically sounded like, what would have happened if you had stopped pulling the levers on the equipment? Like if you had just said, hey, this is not what we plan to do. This is not how we plan to do it. I think the whole operation would have stopped. And this individual that died would probably still be alive if you had stopped pulling the levers and spoken up. So it's an oversimplification of what actually occurred on the day. And, I want to be respectful and mindful of the family that was affected so disastrously from this incident. I also want to be mindful of, the consummate professionals that were there on the day. There were plenty of people that were strong construction professionals that are still in the industry, and I just want to be respectful of them. We learned a lot, but speak up, listen up was a net result from that incident, and that product has been used globally around the world now. And it was originally developed by a company called Core Media, and is now a work product that is owned by Caterpillar Safety Services. And they continue to sell the product to this day.
Painful, but a powerful story. Can you say, why do you think, you said the root cause of this incident was that the people weren't speaking up? Why weren't they speaking up? Why didn't that guy stop moving those levers? What was the deeper issue there?
Well, I think first and foremost, I would say it was one of the root causes. I would not say it was the root cause.
Okay.
But culture is, that's the subject of our podcast today. So we're talking about institutional culture and what are the factors that prevent people from speaking up. And, we're talking about an incident that happened many years ago.
Yeah.
And the construction industry culture has changed for a lot of companies, but maybe not for all companies. There are still companies out there. I do work with over 200 trade partner companies here in New England, and I deal with a full spectrum of, from what I would say immature safety cultures to very mature safety cultures. And in this particular case, the safety culture on that project and that crew that was doing the work was very much a dictatorial culture where the superintendent was the man in charge. Well, that's still an institutional norm today in many organizations. And if the institution or the pocket of culture have not clarified the expectations that we have given you the ability to speak up, and we expect you to exercise that, then there's a very real chance that it won't be exercised. for, people are worried for their jobs.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can have
Hmm.
that kind of a culture. You can
Hmm.
have a culture where there's favoritism on the
Hmm.
project, and certain people get, heard more so than others.
Hmm.
So, it requires a safety professional to really be in tune and in sync with whatever the pockets of culture are that are influencing the workers on site.
But what's that's very articulate. Immature and mature cultures. Yes, I've seen them all too here, David, in my work, mostly in the Midwest. What's the antidote to a dictatorial culture? What are a couple of the elements? I know this deserves a whole book probably, but what are a couple of the key elements?
Well, I think, I'm going to say strategy. The
Uh-huh.
safety professional strategy, their approach to dealing with challenges and concerns is key. So in this particular case, if you have built a credible relationship with an individual that people perceive of as dictatorial, a strategy, I'm not saying the only strategy, but a strategy is to go have a one-on-one conversation with that person and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, look, the perception that some of the crew people may have of you is that you're a bit of a dictator. And like maybe you and I can go hand in hand and we can work together to break down that barrier and that perception. Help the crews to understand that you really do want to hear from them,
Mm-hmm.
right? That you do want them to speak up in the event of a safety concern. Oftentimes these are conversations that just don't happen, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
bottom line is the consummate safety professional needs to champion these efforts. I feel that's their role. And if the personality in this particular case in California, that particular personality, um, in my estimation, probably would not have been open to that conversation coming from the safety pro, but he
Mm-hmm.
certainly would have been open to it coming from the project executive.
Mm-hmm.
So my conversation probably would have been with the project executive and to help me to work with this particular superintendent. So I think every culture requires different strategies. And as a safety professional, we need to be adept at being able to evaluate cultures and figure out what is the appropriate and applicable strategy to use to influence that strategy or that culture in the right direction.
Sounds like it's a strategy that's based on relationships where there's enough, you said credible or trust. So you may not have known the lead on any given job, but you may know the project executive or the project manager, and you perhaps can influence them, and they can perhaps influence the other. So is
Well,
that
you
what
and
you're
I,
saying?
you and I had that conversation last week where we were talking about the book, The Speed of Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot overemphasize the importance of building trust relationships,
Mm-hmm.
increasing your trust quotient with individuals. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you've got the ability to have a strong trust factor with an individual, your ability to move safety culture becomes unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an amazing tool. I highly encourage anybody that has not read The Speed of Trust by Stephen R. Covey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you got to read it because it will put your entire effort on steroids.
Powerful testimony to Covey's book there. Yeah. So how do you see? Because I've read the book and I don't see a lot in the book about the some of the things I care passionately about, and that's rank. And you have a military background, David. I believe you're in the Navy. Correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong.
Yep.
How do you see rank playing into this? Because in the construction culture, as you know, isn't that different from the military or the Catholic Church, where I come from originally many years ago? In this hierarchy, it's hard to break through it, and especially certain cultures are even more deferential, more respectful, less likely to speak up. How do you see rank and the sort of the structure of the hierarchy impacting the trust that Covey and you would talk about?
Yeah, I think the skill set of being able to manage up and down the org chart is vitally important for the safety professional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Building institutional credibility wherever you're working today. Here at Skanska, I'm blessed to have very transparent leaders that I can approach and have at-risk conversations with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can challenge the conventions of their normal thinking, and I can lift up new ideas. That doesn't exist in all cultures. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Skanska has a very mature safety culture.
Mm-hmm.
In organizations, you know, one of the factors that I deal with at Skanska is working with these 200 plus trade partners. And I oftentimes am meeting with the CEOs of these companies. And one of the things that is fairly consistent in immature safety cultures is the senior leader has very little knowledge about how to manage and influence safety outcomes. So
Mm-hmm.
their solution for that is to go hire a safety professional. Now,
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenges with being a safety professional is the people that we are charged with serving, our customers, right? We're not their boss,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think a common theme in almost all business is that we do what our boss wants first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if our bosses are not trained, adequately trained in managing and influencing safety outcomes, then we struggle to be able to have these transparent conversations with them. And it makes it more challenging to influence leaders up the org chart, like you're talking about, the rank.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to influence that higher rank to a different place and a different maturity and safety culture influence if they don't have adequate training.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, um, you know, that transparency and that relationship and the speed of trust helps you with building that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Building that trust level with a senior leader to where they actually acknowledge and recognize how you are best utilized in the organization to move the organization on their safety journey, their safety culture journey.
Mm-hmm.
I, I, I hope I hit your answer there.
Yeah. Yeah, you did it. There's more layers to it, of course, but I hear you saying that to manage up the chart requires training of those at the top. I would also say it requires some training and coaching of those who are lower ranked in the culture, because you may have a lower ranked worker, and you've seen plenty of these guys and women too, who are incredibly expressive and strong. They might they
100%.
they might be like the third highest ranked person on a crew, but they're the loudest, most confident, willing to speak up, speak their mind, have no fear, and they carry a kind of a what I call psychological rank. And so I think it's a mix of training, coaching, and natural skill sets and gifts that people have or don't have. But I think what you say about immature and mature culture relates to this. The more mature cultures are going to be open to the feedback, and this I would point out Reed Hastings' book, if you haven't read it, the No Rules book. Have you seen that one by the CEO of Netflix?
No,
He's
I haven't
huge.
seen that
You'd
one.
love that, David, because he's huge on feedback. The CEO of Netflix, and most people would agree Netflix is a pretty strong company and they have apparently an amazing culture. And one of the pillars of that culture is everyone in that culture is encouraged to ask for and seek feedback. In fact, to sort of push people for honest feedback, because if you have higher rank, you're less likely to get the whole story or even half the story, right? And they know that. So Reed Hastings is huge on, and that's, it's training, and it's also his natural style. But how do you go, especially some of your 200 trade partners, David? And that's a big number of trade partners. How do you go about influencing those cultures, or shaping or changing those cultures when you're working with them and you don't exactly have great influence within their cultures?
So we have a methodology here in New England where we meet with I personally meet with the CEOs of each of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I mean, on average, I'm probably doing 45 to 50 of those meetings per year. And
Wow.
each of these meetings with the CEOs involves, us taking a look at their safety efforts and their results and looking at, a number of years of their experience, both looking at lagging indicators and leading indicators.
Yeah.
But in essence, one of the questions that I will ask every CEO that I meet with
Mm-hmm.
is, what formal knowledge or training do you have to manage or influence safety outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
And once you get a CEO to acknowledge that they have a deficit in what they, the knowledge that they need, they're a competitive group
Mm-hmm.
by nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, the industry we are in is
Mm-hmm.
highly competitive.
Yes.
So when you're able to point out that there's a deficit there and that they can't just depend on the safety pro, like you as a CEO need to know what your job is as the CEO to manage and influence safety outcomes. And when you help them to understand, and I will tell you, in the high 90th percentile, these CEOs have to acknowledge in the conversation that they don't have any formal training
Mm-hmm.
or any formal knowledge.
Yeah.
So we offer that support and knowledge transfer to all the CEOs that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go on a journey with each of
Mm-hmm.
these companies. And sometimes the journey is very short,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is a voluntary process. It is not something that is mandated by Skanska.
Mm-hmm.
They can take us up on the offer or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always very interested in what they're doing to advance their safety efforts. But
Uh-huh.
if they're not advancing their safety efforts and they're looking for help, we're here to help them. We've had some very amazing journeys with companies in our region utilizing this process. I would say there's probably only 20 or 30% of the companies that do follow up.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the most challenging industries, concrete, drywall installation,
Mm-hmm.
roofing contractors,
Mm-hmm.
mechanical
Yeah.
contractors, these are companies that are taking us up on
Wow.
this support and help, and they are seeing dynamic returns on the investment that they make.
Wow.
And it's just made for um, a very exciting approach to managing and influencing safety outcomes, to awaken that spirit and culture in a company.
That's awesome. Wow. And then do you provide the training, David, or do you link them
Yeah.
to others?
No, I provide the training personally. I plug in. I've done coaching sessions with the CEOs where it's one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
After I finish working with the CEO for a little bit, then we move on to working with the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
As most anybody in the construction industry knows, safety really starts with leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I've always spoken of it as a strategic flaw to start at the front line.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to get leadership's buy-in and understanding of what their responsibilities are first.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've got leadership doing the right things, then you can move into middle management, and then you can eventually, get to the front line.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing to see the lights go on when utilizing this process that we use at Skanska, when they realize it's not hard. It's not difficult to lead and manage and influence safety in a way that achieves great results.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard. It's about relationship building. It's about trust building. It's about, you talk about that boisterous guy at the front line. I like to say those people are audacious, right? Like, and I love people that are audacious. I love
Mm-hmm.
people that'll speak their mind.
Me too.
Right.
Me too.
And oftentimes when I'm working with these trade partners, I'll go into a room full of, either executives or superintendents, and they're very skeptical as
Mm-hmm.
we begin this journey together.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it's all over, I can't even tell you how many people come up afterwards and they're like, that is such an easy approach to managing and influencing safety. We teach them a new vocabulary. We
Wow.
teach them how to have dynamic morning conversations about safety. We talk about evaluating those conversations and how to evaluate and assess employees. We talk about risk tolerance and risk appetite, how to evaluate and assess different workers on their risk appetite. These are instrumental tools to being a good supervisor at the front line. These are instrumental to being a good executive in an
Mhm.
organization that genuinely cares about worker safety. It's very rare that I run into any person at any level in the construction industry that doesn't genuinely care about safety. They care
Mhm.
about the people that they manage,
Mhm.
but oftentimes, when we ask these individuals the question about what formal knowledge or training have you acquired in your career to
Mhm.
manage and influence safety outcomes, I, I'm consistently surprised and disappointed that most people don't have any formal knowledge about how to manage. They bring up things like the OSHA 10 or the OSHA 30. Well, OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 do not teach us how to have good conversations,
Not at
right?
all.
They don't teach us how to build trust, right? This methodology teaches all of those things. And people come out of it saying, wow, I didn't realize that managing safety could be this simple.
Wow, you make it so attractive. I want to come to the next class, David, and I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I am curious. Is this a half day? Is this a 6 week? How much time do you
So
take to teach the new?
I call it the Skanska buffet. I have a buffet of classes that we offer to the
Uh-huh.
companies that we're doing this work with.
Uh-huh.
Um, the first is a 2 hour meeting with the CEO, and
Hmm.
that's where we're looking at their lagging and leading indicators, and we're having this kind of like aha moment. And like my objective in this meeting with the CEOs is to create dissatisfaction. If I
Hmm.
can get that CEO dissatisfied with their status quo, then we can move to the next step because they're
Hmm.
competitive. They want to be better. So the
Hmm.
next step is get the CEO. So long story short, we have a program that's called Care for Life
Hmm.
that helps people to identify their internal core value of care for life,
Hmm.
right? And how they should use that core value to trigger actions,
Hmm.
right? To trade like, but for Care for Life, I should do this. I should speak up. I should, go have a conversation, an at-risk conversation with the superintendent, or I
Hmm.
should have an at-risk conversation with my safety manager.
Hmm.
Um, so we teach people how to trigger that Care for Life core value. Care for Life is Skanska's number one global core value, and
Hmm.
we have branded that completely and integrally into all of our efforts.
Hmm.
So after we've taught the foundational course of Care for Life, we teach everybody 20 plus supervisor skills. And the
Hmm.
reason, like somebody might say, well, why would you teach a CEO the supervisor skills? Because I want that CEO to know and understand what his supervisors should be doing in the field so that he can evaluate and assess if his C-suite is getting out there and checking to see, are the foremen and superintendents doing these things,
Hmm.
right? So everybody gets taught the same skills in the supervisory skills program. Then we have executive site safety visit training. So teaching executives how to effectively visit a site in a manner that influences safety culture, right?
Hmm.
Teaching them how to influence culture when they are on site.
Hmm.
Um, and then we have the same thing for evaluating and assessing safety meetings or safety conversations, as we
Hmm.
like to call them.
Hmm.
Those need to be evaluated, and foremen and supervisors need to be given feedback on how well they're managing their safety conversations at the beginning of the day.
Hmm.
One of the things that Skanska found out about 15, 17 years ago is that a dynamic safety conversation each day that is centrically focused on what are we doing today? What are the concerns that we have for today? Like what might bite us?
Hmm.
And what are we going to do to keep that from biting us? If you
Hmm.
can have a dynamic conversation each day at the crew level,
Hmm.
this significantly increases the likelihood that everyone goes home safely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like your language, dynamic conversation. Wow, this is amazing. So it sounds like a 2 hour meeting with the CEO. It sounds like you have a buffet of classes, and then you got some. is this a 5 to 10 hour investment? I'm still
Yeah, so
curious.
supervisor, it depends on strategy, right? And that's why I call it a buffet. I want that CEO to know and understand that Skanska's here to support. So you tell us what bandwidth your company has. You
Yeah,
tell us how you want us to craft this buffet for you so that it works best for you, the company. But I
yeah,
would say, in general, the Care for Life class is about 4 to 5 hours of training.
yeah.
The supervisory skills program is about 4 to 5 hours.
Hmm.
And the ESSV training is about, I should say, ESSV and crew review trainings are about 2 hours. Um, but what I can do is I can take that buffet and I can customize it. I can tailor it to the needs of each individual company. And
Hmm.
typically, what we end up with is the C suite will have a meeting that is a day that includes Care for Life, supervisory skills, and what we call an assessment review of their company and what their current state is in
Hmm.
safety culture and safety efforts. And that's a day long for the C
Hmm.
suite. And
Hmm.
then the supervisory skills, typically we will roll those out with the company. And if it's dedicated to one company, then we'll incorporate that assessment of their current state as well. So it ends up kind of being a full day. Um, and then there are refreshers that can be made available, and additional coaching and mentoring of specific individuals that maybe are struggling to embrace the journey that the company's on.
Hmm.
I try personally to stay very plugged in with each of these CEOs and whatever journey. I kind of become a consulting company, really,
Hmm.
to each of these companies and offer support and guidance whenever they ask for it.
Are you spending more time with your trade partners than with Skanska workers?
100%.
That's what I
100%.
thought. Your real focus is the 200 trade partners.
Well, we don't self perform in New England.
Oh, that's right.
So
That's
our
right.
trade partners represent the single largest risk to our business profile.
Got it. Got it. You're not
So,
self-performing anything. I guess I didn't realize
correct.
that. Okay. Well, that's how exciting.
I
And
mean,
then you and I,
I come from 27 years of self performance work.
yeah.
So I look at our trade partners as that is our self performance, right?
Hmm.
It's not Skanska, but these companies represent the family that gets the job done for us. And I care just as much about every one of those trade workers with every one of those companies as I would in any employee that would be a self performer. I do have 20 or 30 laborers and carpenters throughout the region that are self perform
Yeah.
workers,
Yeah.
but they're not building our projects. They're
Yeah.
supporting the efforts of building the
Yeah.
project.
Just one last question, because I know we're getting towards the end, but it's amazing. I want to talk more with you, David. You and I we're basically in the same business with a different business model, but you make it all sound so easy, and God knows it is not easy, David. I've, like you, suffered many challenging moments and some complete failures. What currently are some of your bigger challenges as you're doing all this great training and coaching work at such a high level? What are some of the challenges that you wish you could solve that are not easy?
You know, our world's full of heavy lifting, and you know, I'm very deep into my career. I think the challenge for me personally is I don't have enough time left, right? Like to continue to do this great work. I'm going to do it as long as I can. But the challenges that I think are always omnipresent in our profession are personalities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And working with challenging personalities. Um, I like to quote Steve Farber, who is a dear friend out in San Diego. He wrote a book called Radical Leap. And LEAP is an acronym that stands for love, energy, audacity, and proof.
Mm.
And the way I put that to work for me is if I put enough love and enough energy and I'm audacious enough, I get the proof that everybody goes home safely. So, the challenges that we're faced with require audacity. So I
Mm-hmm.
encourage every safety professional out there, be audacious in your approaches. If your audacity is not embraced by your employer, it's probably time to find a different employer. And be courageous out there, push the envelope. It is very important that we as safety professionals get out there and prevent serious injuries and fatalities. I think we've got recordable injuries and lost time injuries. I mean, lost time injuries are typically associated with serious injuries, but recordable injuries are not where our focus needs to be anymore. We need to be focused on the prevention of injuries, and we can do that, particularly serious injuries and fatalities. We need to prevent those. And to do that, we have to be passionate safety practitioners. And I'm blessed at Skanska. The folks here are easy to talk to. They're transparent. If there's a new idea, a new way of doing things, you can put it on the table and you can really flesh it out. But I've lived a life working for many different companies where that was not the case. And it's taken me a long time to find Skanska, but at the end of the day, I know that I don't face the same challenges that a lot of safety professionals out there do. And I encourage safety professionals to push the conventions, right? Like, you got to get to a place where you can have great conversations with your company leaders, and you've got to get their buy-in, right? And once you've got leadership buy-in and support, you can accomplish anything.
I love it, David. That maybe a great spot to wrap it up. But where can people find you? You're certainly on LinkedIn, David Watts, Watts. Where else can they find you, and where are you speaking this winter, if anywhere?
I don't mind speaking. Very, very rarely do folks ask me to speak. I'm very engaged in the Construction Safety Research Alliance. I just completed a research project, about a little less than 2-year research project on mental health in construction, which is a very passionate topic for me. I'm getting ready to go into a safety excellence workshop with the Safety Leadership Institute down in Houston. That's coming up in February. But LinkedIn is the best place to contact me. My email's readily available. It's david.watts@skanska.com. People are welcome to reach out, and I'm happy to engage with my fellow passionate peers in the industry.
Well,
I don't have much time for donut eaters and coffee drinkers. I'm not of that type of safety professional. So
I can tell where you're a gift to the construction culture. I hope you get a chance to speak more. I hope this helps get your name even out there more, David. I think you need to do more and more speaking nationally and around the world. You really have a lot of acquired knowledge and an insight that I rarely see. So thank you for your work. Have a great rest of your day, and Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays to you out there on the East Coast.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care.